Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. I want to talk to you today about the state of the nation. This is something that comes from Economic Collapse blog. You get a picture here? There are a number of issues that the author is going to take up. The first one is, he says, when 2020 began, nobody had ever heard of COVID-19 because that term had not even been invented. By the end of the year, there had been more than 83 million confirmed cases around the world and more than 1.8 million deaths. 20 million in the U.S. and more than 350,000 deaths ostensibly from COVID. A politician in Austria showed that a cup of Coca-Cola can test positive for COVID-19. All the masks we've been wearing and discarding add up to more than 1.5 billion. That's with a B, according to one study. Masks that will ultimately be dumped into the oceans of the world this year alone. The lockdowns our politicians instituted to control the spread of COVID-19 resulted in an unemployment shock that was absolutely unprecedented. Since the beginning of the pandemic, there have been more than 70 million new claims for unemployment benefits. That means we have been averaging well over 1 million new claims every week since the first lockdowns went into effect. To put that into perspective, the old all-time record for a single week was 695,000. That was back in 1982. During this pandemic, we have exceeded that number every single week. Now unemployment claims are starting to rise higher again. Almost 4 out of every 10 Americans do not plan to get a COVID-19 vaccine, but the federal government is going to spend $250 million on something they call an information campaign that's designed to convince them otherwise. Some of us say, good luck. The civil unrest that erupted all over America following the death of George Floyd ultimately sparked a crime wave that seems as if it will never end. According to an analysis of data from 57 big city police departments, the number of murders in those cities is up 36.7% over last year. In quite a few of those cities, new all-time records are being established in 2020, and many Americans are anticipating even more violence in 2021. Recent data from Moody's Analytics indicates that approximately 12 million U.S. renters are now at least $5,850 behind in rent and utility payments. Landlords all over the nation are in financial distress because of unpaid rent, and we could potentially see the greatest tsunami of evictions in all of U.S. history if and when all the rent moratoriums are finally lifted in 2021. In 2020, we witnessed massively long lines at food banks all across the country. In some cases, people were lining up as early as 2 a.m. in order to make sure they would be getting something before the supplies were gone. Feeding America, an organization, runs the largest network of food banks in the entire country, and they were estimating that approximately 1 out of every 4 children in the United States would suffer from hunger by the time that 2020 had finally come, or was finally done, We haven't seen an economic downturn this severe since the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the middle class has been hit particularly hard. According to one recent survey, 2020 was a personal financial disaster for 55% of all Americans. But 2020 hasn't been a financial disaster for everyone. Forbes recently published an article which celebrated 50 doctors, scientists, and healthcare entrepreneurs that became pandemic billionaires in 2020. Did they mention this financial disaster was orchestrated by our government? No. Newsflash, the U.S. government continues to waste money in some of the craziest ways imaginable. According to U.S. Senator Rand Paul, the federal government has spent $6.9 million to develop a smart toilet which uses a very small camera to identify your anal print. One of the reasons why so much crazy spending happens is because our politicians don't actually read the bills they pass. For example, the spending bill that the House of Representatives recently passed was 5,593 pages long, and members of the House were given only a few hours to look at it. Unsurprisingly, the bill passed the House by a vote of 359 to 53. When Barack Obama first entered the White House, the U.S. was $10.6 trillion in debt. Today, we are $27.5 trillion in debt, and soon that total will hit the $30 trillion mark. That's 3 times. Needless to say, this is a recipe for national financial suicide. The decline of the U.S. family continued to accelerate in 2020. According to a recent Gallup survey, only 29% of Americans believe that it's very important for couples who have children together to be married. Americans have continued to get even bigger in 2020. At this point, 73% of the entire U.S. population is either overweight or obese. The amount of control the big tech companies have over our lives has gotten more than just a little bit frightening, but most Americans don't seem to mind. In one recent survey, it was learned that 2 out of every 3 Americans do not care if their smart devices are recording what they say and do at all times. Their response? Who's reading, listening to these recordings? Nobody. Not until they need to know. If everyone tried to take our smart devices away, then most of us would suddenly become very angry. Another recent survey found that the average person will spend a total of 44 years looking at digital devices during their lifetimes. Not baby boomers, just young people, those under 60 years of age. The recent presidential election has deeply divided our nation, and we're all just surprised. 96% of Democrats believe that Joe Biden was elected fairly. Only 20% of Republicans feel the same way. Joe Biden only won 16.7% of the counties in the United States. That was a new record low for a winning candidate. The previous record was 22%. That's Barack Obama's record low in 2012. Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? And these men also set another record, that of winning the most votes. Joe Biden won the most overall votes in U.S. history by a very wide margin. 81 million votes, which was about 12 million more than Barack Obama got in 2008 when he set the old record. It's almost unbelievable. On December 14th, the Electoral College voted to make Joe Biden the next president of the United States. Amazingly, that date is precisely halfway between the Great American Eclipse of 2017 and the Great American Eclipse of 2024. If you plot the paths of these 2 eclipses on a map of the United States, you will see that they combine to form a giant X across the heartland of America. X marks the spot.